Inside is a very similar game to Limbo. It's a 2D puzzle platformer with a limited storyline following a boy through a bizarre landscape. The puzzles are equally as good, the look of the game is equally as impressive, and the platforming is as equally tight and responsive. Yet, despite the striking similarities, Inside still managed to achieve widespread critical acclaim much like its predecessor did. Is this a case of the gaming industry rewarding lazy, rehashed content with a shiny new coat of paint and a £50 price tag reattached? Nah, that'd be unheard of. But nonetheless, these games have a lot in common with one another. Based on that, I didn't want to review Inside the same way I did with Limbo. I'd only be repeating myself, and the main thing to take away from this is if you like Limbo, you'll like Inside. Instead, given how similar they are, I wanted to compare Inside more directly to Limbo and look at ways Inside is both better and worse than its predecessor. However, if you do want more context to this video, or just want to see what I thought of Limbo, then I urge you to check out part 1 of this review. Link's probably on screen somewhere now if I've managed to get the hang of this YouTube malarkey, or it'll just be in the description. Anyway, Inside released back on June 29th, 2016. It was a Wednesday, and given that it was the height of summer in England, it was probably raining. I can still remember the launch of Inside well. The Xbox One had little in the way of gripping first-party titles, so yet again it was down to the indie market to provide. I was excited to hear that Limbo was getting a spiritual successor, and 6 years between such short titles felt like a lifetime, so as soon as I got the opportunity, I made sure I got it pre-installed, just waiting for 12 AM to flash up on the Xbox home screen so I could dive in. It ended up being well past that time before the embargo was lifted, and I was pondering what the point of pre-installing games is if it's still quicker to drive to the store for a midnight launch. Either way, the game released, and I finally got my chance to play Inside. Upon booting the game up for the first time, I was greeted with a familiar forest setting, complete with light bleeding through the trees and silhouettes making up the dense surroundings. It was obvious that this is yet another visually pleasing game, and it only gets better as you progress. The lighting again is really nice and does wonders helping to make the environment come to life in its own desolate and decrepit manner. As well as that, the water and rain effects are a clear step up from their older brother and go a long way to selling the look of the world. Much like Limbo, I can see this game's visuals aging like a fine wine. There's even some colour here this time around. It's very muted to keep with the monochrome look these games are known for, but there's enough here to allow different areas to feel unique from one another. They also use the colour to subtly tell the player how best to progress by having key items stand out a little bit more from their surroundings. In some ways, it gives me a Mirror's Edge feel to it, but that might just be me. However, as nice as the visuals are, it doesn't quite hit the same beats as Limbo does. Right from the get-go you were hit with a striking minimalistic colour scheme and unique art direction, whereas here it's lacking something. Effects such as the film grain, light flicker and vignette have been drastically toned down or outright removed, and what's left are more basic looking 3D models, the very thing the creators didn't want for the first game. I can't say I'm a fan of the boy's design either. It feels less defined, making him look a lot more like everyone else in the game. His red sweater being his only real unique characteristic, and with the muted colours, it doesn't stand out as much as the boy's white eyes do in Limbo. However, I do like how all the people in the game have no facial features. It's kinda creepy and means you have to rely on their body movements a lot more to work out what their role is in all of this. Speaking of which, the boy has a lot more animation this time around, making him seem like he's actually somewhat invested in the events unfolding around him. As much as I prefer Limbo's art style, there's a good reason for biting the bullet and choosing to use the 3D this time around. The change in direction meant they could change how the camera works as well, giving Inside a more cinematic quality to it that the static camera of Limbo was missing. Chase sequences feel that little bit more thrilling as the camera flies up and widens to show a pack of attack dogs hunting you down, or when you descend deep underwater, it'll pull away to reveal the size and scope of the area you're in, making the whole world feel much more important to the gameplay. Enemies also make use of the new 3D environment. Whilst you're stuck to the 2D plane, threats can come and go as they please. A good example is when you've got to prise open a doorway while a pack of dogs chase you down. You can only move left and right while they can move into the background to flank you. They're still just glorified puzzles, but it's yet another way Playdead manages to reinvent the wheel. The game as a whole is a lot more environmentally focused, which I'm guessing is a direct response to the criticism of the first game. To that end, everything feels a lot more connected as you progress, going from forest and farmland to cities and facilities. I like how the game starts out as a more realistic place to begin with, but by the end you'll be just as neck deep in the bazaar as you were in Limbo. I think my main criticism of Inside is just how big some of these places can get. There are large areas of the game where you'll be just moving in one direction and nothing else. Great for scenery, but not so fun on repeat playthroughs. Even some of the puzzles suffer from this by being multi-layered, where picking the wrong direction to explore will lead to a dead end until you've completed something elsewhere and returned later on. The controls of Inside are a slight improvement over Limbo as well. I know I said Limbo's controls were near perfection, and I stand by that point, but playing these back to back and the difference is night and day. Everything that was great about Limbo has been kept, whilst improving the flow of the boy's on-foot movement, making him snappier than ever, particularly when he's climbing or vaulting. To mix up the gameplay though, the boy can now swim, adding everyone's favourite thing to the game: water levels. They're not too bad, but I wouldn't call them all that fun either. They work well when used in puzzles, but when you're just travelling through them they can be a bit of a slog, and I think that's down to how slow the boy moves in H2O. And if you're anything like me and have to explore every single part of the screen just to be sure you haven't missed anything, you're going to spend a lot of time charting lifeless empty marinas. They even added a diving bell to take control of. I knew the vehicles section had to be hidden somewhere. It's practically a legal requirement for a developer to be officially recognised. I don't have too much to say about the diving bell, to be fair. It handles well, it moves quicker, definitely better than the boy when he takes a plunge, and it has a boost mechanic that is surprisingly satisfying to use. It's just a shame we didn't get to spend all that much time with this vehicle, instead being forced to use the boy's inferior aquatic moveset. The diving bell had barely any puzzle utility outside of bashing down a few walls, and only really served as a quick way of traversing larger underwater sections. The quality of the puzzles on offer here are as good as Limbo's as well, and Playdead managed to keep things fresh without needing to expand the basic control scheme. Inside still follows Playdead's ethos for making a game that's easy to pick up and play, without the need to put a word of text on screen teaching the player the mechanics. Because of that, the starting puzzles are a pretty basic affair, but I don't think it hurts the game for fans returning from Limbo, and keeps the game accessible enough to a potentially new audience on the Xbox One. Some of the puzzles even feel like they came straight out of Limbo, which may even be the case, given that in an interview, Playdead's Aunt Jensen revealed that a lot of Limbo's ideas were cut late into production, but that they were still working with some of those same concepts. Either way, they managed to add some interesting mechanics into the mix this time around. My favourite puzzles typically involve taking control of these zombie-like people when wired up to a helmet, giving the game a more cooperative vibe at times and often making use of the new 3D backgrounds. Puzzles that involve mimicking other people's actions, climbing into a body of water floating on the ceiling, or firing chicks out of a cannon to knock a hay bale off a ledge, all gave me the appropriate level of what the fuck, and stayed in my memory all the more because of it. I know that one of my gripes with Limbo was it resorting to basic buzzsaws and pitfalls later on, and it's good to see they've improved tenfold in that department. Where the spider was Limbo's only real antagonistic set piece, here, the humans and experiments will be a present throughout, and never waste an opportunity to commit child murder. It's good for building a cohesive world, but also for building panic. I can't say I have a fear of deep water, but anytime I have to submerge and see a mermaid screaming towards me, I get a little bit flustered. The worst bit is seeing its hand reaching out from the water and realising just how close it was to grabbing you. Along with that, the sound design of Inside managed to feel relatable to its predecessor, despite taking a slightly different approach at times. Both games are equally as atmospheric in their execution, but where Limbo felt shocking and visceral, Inside feels like it's building up its world. From the reverb-stricken footsteps ricocheting around derelict subway stations, to the wind rustling through the trees, Inside captured the sounds of these places in a much more organic way. The sound design is also used as more of a puzzle mechanic throughout the game. It's something Limbo tried to do, but only near the very end of its run, so I'm glad it's got a bit more attention here. I love the section where you have to shelter from sound waves that happen every few seconds. The music swells during these moments and gives real force to the impact of each blast. Hell, this is probably a good example of all the elements of Inside working well together. Sound design, puzzles, the 3D backdrops, and the environmental storytelling all working as one. It's good, chef's kiss. Come to think of it, there's a lot of environmental storytelling in this game. From the get-go, you're greeted with people being rounded up into trucks only to find them later seemingly hypnotised into repetitive behaviours. The world is rich with details like this all around, and I can see it being plenty for a budding conspiracy theorist to sink their teeth into. So then, it's such a shame that all of that world building kind of goes to waste in my opinion. I can see that being an unpopular stance given the criticism of Limbo's story, and it's clear that the structuring of Inside was a direct response to that feedback. I've already gone into raptures on why I think Limbo's story, despite being incredibly basic, actually works fairly well, but Inside I don't quite feel the same way about it. Limbo's simple story meant that the game ends when the boy finds his sister. It doesn't tell us about the world, why or how we're in Limbo, so it's still vague and I can see why people wouldn't like that. But I'd argue that Inside is even more vague because it does more to flesh out its world. The mermaid creature seems to want to drown you only to give you the ability to breathe underwater later on. Zombies will eventually start following you without a controller helmet strapped to you. People stop attacking you when they see the blob creature. Pig corpses litter the farmland while worms cause the few remaining to be aggressive. And the ending scene is the same as the miniature diorama built into one of the office blocks. I could go on. But the bottom line here is, what does any of this mean in the grand scheme of things? It shows Playdead put more thought into what looks like a cohesive story, but with how many ways you could interpret it, does any of that matter? It's still vague, it's still open-ended. Hell, even the Xbox store isn't giving up any trade secrets this time around. I don't even know why the boy's doing all of what he's doing. Inside's world building is a step in the right direction, but on its own, I feel like it does more harm than good. However, that's just one part of the story. Limbo also had the issue of ending seemingly out of the blue. Well, that issue somewhat persists here as well. After merging with a mound of fat, you tear through a facility that's supposedly responsible for the brain-dead and hostile monsters you've encountered along your travels. It's honestly a waste of resources when a Saturday night out in a Wetherspoons would produce similar results, but I digress. Anyway, it's a fun sequence terrorising your way through the complex, and builds up to the ending quite well. As you're going about your rampage, various workers will aid your progress in accessing more of the facility. Are they helping you to escape? Or are you just another one of their experiments? The latter seems to be the case, as a group of people gather in a dark room, children and all, silently watching as they trap you in a tank. From there, you break out and crash through a wall onto the shoreline, the same one that's depicted as a diorama previously. And at this point, the game just ends. Credits roll, that's it. What I think works about this is the build-up. Merging into a blob and leaving a wake of destruction in your path feels like a suitable step up from what's come before. You'll still be doing basically the same thing gameplay-wise, but now there's been a shift in a dynamic, covertly preparing the player for the climax. And that's the thing that didn't work. The climax felt like it didn't pay off at all and only served to confuse, piling more questions onto an already well-stocked heap. I think an ending that brought those subtle environmental details together would have suited a lot more. Something that gave closure to all of those unexplainable things you've encountered in one big eureka moment, where the pin finally drops and the master plan is revealed. That being said, there is actually another ending to this game. Much like the eggs in Limbo, Inside has metal spheres hidden throughout its run, just waiting for you to stumble across and unplug them. I think Inside handles its collectibles much better than Limbo did. Every so often there'll be a yellow cable wrapped around the architecture of the level, hinting to you that a sphere's nearby. It makes hunting these things a hell of a lot easier, and chances are you'll have found more of them during your run than its counterparts in Limbo. They still use achievements to hint at their locations as well, which is still a fun way of implementing them. Deactivating all the spheres opens up a bigger one for you to pull the plug on, which seems to do nothing other than award you with an achievement, but upon returning to the secret bunker underneath the farm, you can now enter a code that matches a sound pattern playing over various radios in the game. Or you can just Google it, I am not judging you. From there, you'll be in a room with a control helmet wired up with yellow cables. You can take a panel off the wall and shut down the whole system, where the boy will take a similar lifeless stance to that of a zombie when not being controlled. I guess this ending implies that the boy has been unplugged from you, the player, given how you've been tasked with controlling him. It's a fun little sequence, the kind of thing you'd hear rumours about in the school playground, but that's all it is. It only adds more questions than answers them, and I kinda preferred having a secret level to play in Limbo. I know, I moan that Limbo lacked a secret ending. and now I'm criticising this for the exact opposite thing. But I think both games would have benefited from having a secret level that's a bit tougher to complete, which rewards you with an alternate ending. Something satisfying, even if the developers didn't want it as canon to the main story. And with that last secret out of the way, that's all there is to Playdead's Inside. Yet again, it's another fantastic puzzle platformer that manages to keep the magic of Limbo while carving its own identity onto the world. I feel Inside tries to fix the perceived issues with Limbo, but by doing so creates its own set of problems. Though I prefer Limbo, Inside certainly does refine and improve the formula in a lot of ways, and much like its older sibling, it's a game I can happily come back to time and again. However, looking forward to the future, with only 2 games under their belt, what direction will Playdead take moving forward? Well, it turns out there's been a bit of drama behind the scenes at the studio, as Dino Patti, one of the co-founders of Playdead, left the company shortly after the release of Inside due to a rift developing between him and fellow co-founder Arndt Jensen. Patti moved on to co-found a brand new studio known as Jumpship, who released their first game Somerville as recently as a couple of months ago. It's said to keep with the traditional Playdead formula, but has received more mixed reviews than its stepbrothers. Either way, I had no idea this was a thing or even that it had been released till doing the research for this video, so I'll have to give it a try for myself at some point. And as for Playdead themselves, they are busy at work with Project 3, the working title and spiritual successors to their previous games. Studios are definitely more than the sum of their parts, but I hope the loss of one of the studio's main influences isn't going to have too much of a negative impact on their third title. Still though, that's just speculation, and what we do have are 2 fantastic puzzle platformers that have definitely left their mark on the industry. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment which was your favourite of the 2 games, and you probably can't go wrong with a cheeky sub while you're at it. Thanks for watching, ta-ra!